This, to me, is why you trade for Joe Flacco. All right, welcome in. It is the Breer Report for Friday, October the 17th. Week 7 is now underway, and we are going to start with game 1 of Week 7. And that was the Cincinnati Bengals outlasting the Pittsburgh Steelers on Thursday Night Football. An absolute barn burner. And Joe Flacco throws for over 300 yards, throws for 3 touchdowns. Jamar Chase breaks a franchise record for catches in a game. And this, to me, is the manifestation of why you trade for Joe Flacco. I know a lot of people have looked at it and said, well, what about Joe Flacco playing against that behind that line, and he can't move anymore and he's going to get murdered. And what you didn't realize was there's a bigger plan at work here. First of all, he's throwing to better receivers than he was in Cleveland. They're going to have a better chance to get him the ball quicker. It'll mitigate their offensive line issue because he's an experienced drop back passer. They're going to have to do less to adjust what they do really well with Joe Burrow as their quarterback to now having Joe Flacco in there. And really, I would take this back to the decision-making process in the beginning, which kicked off now 11 days ago. On the Monday after their loss to Detroit, they decided we need to go get a quarterback. Jake Browning isn't going to be good enough. And so they broke down about a dozen quarterbacks. They narrowed that down to 5. The coaches went through games of each of those 5 quarterbacks. And the reason they land on Joe Flacco again is because they wanted to give their team a chance to play the same sort of way, or it's some sort of facsimile the sort of way that they play with Joe Burrow as the quarterback. And they looked through names like Jameis Winston. They looked at Derek Carr. They looked at Russell Wilson. They looked at Tommy DeVito. They looked at Tanner McKee, guys older, younger, guys with some experience like Davis Webb, guys with less experience like Stetson Bennett. In the end, really what they found in Joe Flacco was a guy who could come in, operate the offense, create the least disruption for the other 10 guys in the huddle. He did have some carryover in what he'd done in the past and what they'd be asking him to do in Cincinnati. And then the overarching idea from there is to find a way to keep yourself in the playoff race. And I've advocated for them trading for a quarterback for a few weeks now, for a few weeks before they traded for Joe Flacco. And the reason why, and I learned this covering the Brady Manning rivalry, is you see what happened to those franchises when they were destabilized at quarterback. When you have one of these guys, you have to treat every opportunity that you have to go into January with them at quarterback as gold. And Joe Burrow's injury is such where there is an opportunity for him to come back later in the year. And you want to give him the opportunity to get the team in the playoffs, because once you get into the playoffs with somebody like Joe Burrow at quarterback, anything can happen. And that's where the Bengals are now. Again, Joe Flacco deserves a ton of credit for playing the way that he did last night, for bringing them back in the end after they blew the 10-point lead, getting Evan McPherson in position to kick that field goal, finding a way to re-energize Jamar Chase and T. Higgins from a football standpoint. All of it was there. And now the picture of the rest of the season looks a little bit different. They don't have to go on the road again for another month. The next 2 weeks, they have the Jets, they have the Bears. I'm not saying those are automatic wins, maybe the Jets more so than the Bears, but that's an opportunity for the Bengals to get 2 more wins. And now you're 5-4 going into your bye. On the other side of your bye, you've got the Steelers in Pittsburgh. Then you've got the Patriots. Then you've got the Ravens. And I just look at this now as if there's a chance to get yourself to 7-6 on December 14th when you play the Ravens, which is 3 months to the day of Joe Burrow getting hurt. And now all of a sudden you've got a chance to get in, and you've developed different parts of your team because you didn't have, the franchise back there at quarterback. And Joe Burrow's entering into that after the year that he had last year. I think you got a chance to be a really cool story down the stretch of the year, to get yourself into the playoffs and to compete for a championship. So I love where the Bengals are coming out of this. I really like the addition of Joe Flacco, the idea behind going and getting Joe Flacco. I think you started to see signs that this was possible in the second half of the Green Bay game, and now it's coming together. This looks like a totally different offense than it did just 12 days ago when the Bengals got routed by the Lions. Our second topic for today, The Eagles and the Vikings play on Sunday. Pivotal game for both teams. For the Eagles, coming off of consecutive losses, they sit here now at 4-2. This is a big one just in where they are as a team. They did not look great the last couple of weeks. There's no sugarcoating that. And losing to the Broncos and the Giants. And now you see this gut check and where they are. Where are they as a team? What does A.J. Brown look like? Are they able to get more out of Saquon Barkley? Does the offensive line become dominant again? What does Jalen Carter and that defense look like? So this is a gut check moment for the Eagles where now they've sustained a couple of losses. And is this going to look more like the way that they pulled themselves together early in the 24 season? Or does this start to look a little bit more like the 23 season? Again, there's reason to have a ton of confidence in Nick Sirianni's ability to bring all of the pieces together and manage the egos, manage the personalities, and go forward. But this is a good time to check in on where all of that's at. And now the Vikings, as they continue to try to survive the J.J. McCarthy injury, let's see what Carson Wentz looks like coming off of a bye. Likelihood, it seems like he's going to play. J.J. McCarthy's got that high ankle sprain. There's a high rate of re-injury with those sorts of things. So I would assume they would be careful with him. They've been careful with him through this week. Unless he's feeling great coming out of today, I think they probably give him another week. Can they survive with Carson Wentz? Just an interesting race now in the NFC North with every one of those teams alive. See the Lions, despite their loss last week to the Chiefs, the Lions are obviously very much alive. The Packers come back alive against the Bengals last week. The Chicago Bears are suddenly red hot. Where do the Vikings fit into that mix? We'll find out some more on Sunday when they play the Eagles. Finally, our third topic, and this one isn't until Monday, but because we don't have another Breer Report till Tuesday, I figure it was worth addressing because to me it's the best game on the schedule, and that's the Buccaneers and the Lions. So much intrigue here. For the Bucs, this is about leveling up, right? Since you lost Tom Brady, you've come out of that clean, right? Like you've been able to win the division a couple times in a row with Baker Mayfield as your quarterback. But you haven't quite gotten back to that level you were at with Tom Brady. You haven't quite gotten yourself back on to that true championship contender level. Didn't happen last year. Didn't happen the year before, as good as you were. And now I think they believe that they're back there. And we've seen the way that Baker Mayfield, that offense, have been able to withstand so many losses over the course of the first month and a half of the season. They started the season without Tristan Wirfs. They're now without Luke Gadecki. They've had to manage that. They lost Cody Mock, another starting lineman, for a period of time. They've had Chris Godwin in and out of the lineup the last few weeks. He started the season coming back still from the dislocated ankle. Emeka Egbuka went down last week. Bucky Irving's down. So they've managed a lot of those injuries on the offensive side of the ball. And they're coming into this game with just one loss. And so I think this is a chance for the Buccaneers to assert themselves as the top dog in the NFC. The Lions, of course, this is sort of another one where they're everyone's big game now. And last week they lose to the Chiefs. How do they respond to that? I cannot wait till that. That's the front end of a Monday night doubleheader that looks really good. I see two of the best games in the schedule. You got Bucs and Lions at 7 o'clock Eastern. And then, of course, Texans, Seahawks at 10 o'clock, which we'll see whether or not we can all stay awake for that one to cap off week 7. Appreciate you guys coming out. As always, please leave your feedback down below in the comments here on YouTube, or you can get me on social media at Albert Breer on Twitter, at Albert R. Breer on Facebook, at Albert_Breer on Instagram. Enjoy week 7, everybody. We'll see you on Tuesday.